My name is Nolan Mercer, and the day my father celebrated throwing me out of his house, he didn't do it privately or angrily or even impulsively. He catered it. I turned onto Juniper Street just after 5:30 and saw folding tables set up across the front yard like someone was hosting a graduation party. There were coolers by the walkway. A Bluetooth speaker on the porch railing blasting old rock loud enough for the whole block to hear. Black and gold balloons tied to the mailbox. A sheet cake on a plastic table with blue frosting that said, "Congrats on your freedom, Gary." And hanging over the porch, screwed into the wood like they wanted it to survive a storm, was a painted plywood sign in thick red letters. "Parasite evicted. Welcome back to peace." People were laughing before I even killed the engine. My father was at the grill in a white apron that said "King of the House," holding a beer in one hand and metal tongs in the other like he was the host of a neighborhood cookout instead of a man publicly humiliating his own son. My Aunt Rochelle was already drunk enough to lean when she laughed. My cousin Brent had his phone out. Two neighbors stood near the flower bed with paper plates, pretending they weren't staring. My younger brother Tyler saw my car and slapped the hood of the grill with his free hand. "There he is," he shouted. "The guest of honor." Everybody laughed harder. Then someone actually clapped. I sat there with both hands still on the wheel, looking at that sign, that cake, those balloons, and the crowd smiling like this was normal, and the strangest part was not that they were cruel. It was that none of them looked ashamed. Nobody had the face of someone caught going too far. Nobody looked hesitant. Nobody looked away. My father had told the story so many times in so many polished little pieces that by then they all believed they were standing in the yard of a generous man finally reclaiming his life from a lazy son who had drained him dry. 13 days later, that same man left me a voicemail at 6:14 in the morning, voice shaking, saying my name like a prayer and ending the message with 4 words I had never heard him say to me in my entire life. "Please call me back." But before I tell you why he was begging, you need to understand what kind of lie has to be told, and told well, before a father can throw a party for humiliating his own son and still feel righteous doing it. The public version of me was clean, simple, and extremely convenient for everyone involved. I was 32. My engagement had collapsed 2 years earlier. I had moved back home temporarily and apparently never found my feet again. I worked on a laptop, which in my father's world meant I did nothing real. I was always in the house, always around, always available, and according to him that meant I was drifting, existing off his generosity, hiding from adulthood, dead weight with Wi-Fi. He loved saying that I did email stuff. That was the phrase, not operations work, not contract support, not compliance systems, not process consulting. Email stuff. He said it with that little amused shrug men use when they want your competence to sound decorative. Something soft, something unserious. The kind of work people only tolerate until the air conditioning stops working, payroll fails, the tax notice arrives, the insurance lapses, the client threatens legal action, and suddenly everybody wants the person who does email stuff to fix the part they didn't notice was holding the building up. My father owned Mercer Mechanical Services, an HVAC and refrigeration company in Dayton that looked solid from the outside because loud men often do. Branded vans, uniforms, commercial clients, early mornings, grease under the nails, a handshake reputation, the whole performance of reliability. Underneath that it was wrought with a logo. Invoices sat unanswered for weeks. Insurance renewals were handled at the last possible second, if at all. Vendor accounts were always one missed payment away from restriction. Payroll was a weekly gamble. Service contracts got renewed late because no one tracked the paperwork properly. Tax notices stacked up in drawers. My father overpromised timelines, underbid jobs, ignored process, and treated every near disaster like it had appeared out of nowhere instead of being the direct result of his own habits. Then he'd get loud and call it leadership. I worked remotely in operations support and contract administration for regional service companies. I cleaned up systems. I tracked deadlines, corrected compliance issues, built workflows, organized documentation, stabilized service communication, and prevented expensive mistakes before they became public embarrassment. It paid well because most people hate invisible work until the second their business starts bleeding from all the places nobody glamorous wants to look. I moved back after my engagement ended because at first, helping my father was supposed to be temporary. That's how people like me get trapped, not through one huge sacrifice, through 1,000 reasonable ones. The first month, I helped him organize a permit issue with one municipal account. Then I cleaned up a service agreement renewal that had almost been lost over missing insurance paperwork. Then I fixed billing codes on a hospital contract before they froze payments. Then the office manager quit and left behind a digital landfill nobody understood. Then I discovered his dispatch software was being half-managed through expired logins and backup cards that kept failing. Then there was a payroll shortfall on a Friday. Then a van insurance lapse. Then overdue utility notices tied to the shop. Then a supplier threatening to pause shipments over missed remittance. Every time I fixed one leak, I found two more behind the wall. And every time I fixed something, the same thing happened. My father acted like it either hadn't mattered or had somehow fixed itself. He never introduced me as the person keeping Mercer Mechanical from publicly embarrassing itself. He introduced me as my son who's figuring some things out. If I corrected a contract before a client walked, he acted like I had done some light office favor. If I stayed up until 1 in the morning rebuilding documentation he had ignored for weeks, he joked the next morning that it must be nice not to have a real schedule. If I floated a payroll gap, covered a fuel card shortfall, paid the shop power to stop a disconnect, or fronted a vendor deposit to keep a job alive, he called it family helping family. That sentence matters, because families like mine only use it in one direction. I paid more than anyone in that house ever acknowledged. Not whole glamorous bills anyone could point to in gratitude. The dangerous amounts, the missing amounts, the amounts that kept systems from failing loudly enough for outsiders to hear. A shop utility balance here, a software renewal there, emergency same-day parts shipping, insurance reinstatement, fuel transfers, a down payment on a service tablet, 3 months of grandmother Irene's prescriptions because Dad said he'd handle it and then didn't, Tyler's truck insurance when he was tight this month. Rochelle's electric bill once when she came through crying and Dad said we should all pitch in. Nobody ever remembered the rescue, only the convenience after. That was my place in the house. Useful and deniable. My father hated the kind of work that saved him because he couldn't perform it in front of other men. To him, visible labor was moral labor. If he couldn't see sweat, he couldn't respect it. He'd pass my room while I was on a call repairing one of his account disasters and mutter, "Must be nice." Then an hour later he'd ask if I could rewrite an email because his version made him sound, in his words, too angry but not weak. He treated my competence the way people treat utilities, essential when they fail, invisible when they work, and because he set the hierarchy, everybody else followed. Tyler learned early that mocking me made Dad laugh. Rochelle sided with whoever seemed strongest because closeness to power was her version of safety. Grandmother Irene wrapped every cruelty in moral language, which made it harder to fight because she never sounded openly vicious. She sounded concerned, disappointed, prayerful, and that's how families like mine become efficient. Nobody has to plan the cruelty. The approval structure is already there. Mine was obvious. I was the one they could all stand on. What changed was not their opinion of me. What changed was that one night I heard my father say out loud what he had been building toward for years. It was late. I was upstairs reconciling invoice errors on a medical contract that should never have made it to me in the first place when I heard voices through the open kitchen window below. My father was outside with Tyler and Rochelle. They had been drinking. Rochelle asked him when he was finally making me move out. Tyler said the house would be better the second my stuff was gone. Then my father laughed and said, "Soon, I'm done subsidizing a grown man's extended adolescence." Tyler said, "You should throw a party." And my father said, "Not a bad idea. Public embarrassment might do what patience didn't." Then all three of them laughed. That was the moment something inside me went still, not shattered, still. Because until then, part of me had still been trying to explain them to myself, to interpret, to soften. To believe that maybe if he understood what I had actually been doing, some part of him would be ashamed. But that night I realized the more dangerous truth. He really believed the myth. He believed the roof over my head erased every dollar, every fix, every rescue, every hour. He believed that because I didn't invoice him, my labor had no value. He believed that because I had done it quietly, it didn't count. He believed that if I left, what he would lose was a dependent son in a back bedroom, not the infrastructure he had been standing on. That was when I stopped feeling hurt and started becoming precise. I didn't confront him. I documented. People think revenge starts with rage. Mine started with folders. I went back through 4 years of bank statements, transfer histories, billing records, vendor emails, payroll gaps, insurance notices, utility confirmations, saved texts, and voicemails. Every time I covered a shortfall, it went into a spreadsheet. Every time I corrected a failure before it became public, I noted the date, the risk, and the consequence avoided. Every time Tyler texted, "Can you spot me till next week?" it got saved. Every time Dad wrote, "Handle this," or "Don't make this a whole thing," or "Fix before client sees," it became a PDF. Every temporary loan, every emergency transfer, every silent intervention, every unpaid hour spent translating his chaos into something that looked like competence went into the record. I didn't just count money. I counted dependency. The total made me lean back in my chair and stare at the screen for a long time. Direct financial support over 4 years had crossed $87,000, and that was the conservative number. That did not include the value of my labor. It did not include the accounts I kept from walking. It did not include penalties avoided because I caught notices before agencies escalated them. It did not include how much it was worth to have one person in the background fixing every panicked, preventable mess before the outside world saw how flimsy the inside really was. Around the same time, one of my regular clients near Indianapolis offered me a 12-month operations contract with enough stability to get my own place and enough distance to breathe like a normal person again. I accepted it the same day, put down a deposit on a 1-bedroom apartment, said nothing to anyone, rented a storage unit, started moving things out in stages so gradual nobody noticed. A box of books, winter clothes, the hard drives, the office chair I had bought myself. The monitor my father kept referring to as household property, files, kitchen equipment, the things people in controlling houses always notice too late. Maybe that sounds calculated. It was. When you come from a family where every boundary becomes an argument, secrecy stops feeling dishonest and starts feeling like oxygen. My father made the formal speech 6 days before the party. He caught me in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning and told me I needed to be out by Saturday. He had that smug, ceremonial tone men use when they think they're handing down justice instead of humiliating someone weaker than themselves. He said he loved me too much to keep enabling me. He said no man earns respect hiding in his father's house. He said I needed structure, fear, maybe even a little shame. He actually smiled when he said that part. I asked him one question. Do you want me gone or do you want to enjoy it? He smiled wider. Could be both. That should have been the moment I exploded. It would have felt satisfying for maybe 30 seconds. But I had spent 4 years watching how he operated. My father could survive facts in private. He would twist them, reframe them, deny them, and by the next family lunch the story would be that unstable Nolan tried to blackmail him after being lovingly pushed toward adulthood. No, if truth was going to land, it needed witnesses. Better yet, consequences. So I nodded like a son too embarrassed to fight and kept moving. By Thursday, almost everything valuable was out of the house. Friday night, after everyone was asleep, I sat in the spare room and quietly removed my hidden support from the systems that had been feeding my father's illusion of control. I removed my card from the fuel account, canceled the backup payment method on dispatch software, stopped bridging the shop utility, pulled my credentials from 2 vendor portals, ended the emergency subscription renewal I had been covering, sent one supplier a neutral note that future rush orders would require direct management authorization. I did not sabotage anything. That part matters. I did not break his business. I stopped carrying it. Then I closed my laptop, packed the last banker's box, and went to sleep in the same room where they thought a dependent son was still waiting to be taught a lesson. The next afternoon, I drove back to Juniper Street for the final pickup and found the party waiting for me. The sign, the balloons, the cake, the applause, the speaker, the grill's smoke, Brent recording, Tyler laughing too hard, Rochelle already drunk. Grandmother Irene sitting on the porch in her pressed blouse like she was attending a difficult but righteous family ceremony. My father in that stupid apron, glowing with the pleasure of a man who thought he finally had the audience he deserved. What made it worse was the detail. The cake had little piped frosting keys on it. Someone had placed a pack of ramen noodles next to the serving knife. There was a stack of paper plates by the beer cooler with "Good Luck," NOLAN written in marker on the top one. My last box had been left by the hall closet with a sticky note on it in Tyler's handwriting, "Try adulthood this time." It wasn't rage that hit me standing there. It was clarity so sharp it almost felt peaceful. Because people don't put this much effort into humiliating someone they think is powerful. They do it to someone they think can't afford to respond. Tyler threw the pack of ramen onto my windshield and said, "Starter groceries." Rochelle laughed so hard she had to grab the table. Brent zoomed in with his phone. One of the neighbors actually winced, but only for a second. My father didn't tell anybody to stop. He didn't need to. Leadership in families like mine is often just permission with a smile. When I went inside, the house sounded hollow. When I saw the sticky note on my box, I photographed it. Then I photographed the hall. Then I took the box outside and photographed the sign, the balloons, the cake, the crowd, my father's grin, Tyler mid-laugh, Brent's phone lifted like a witness for the wrong side. My father saw me taking the pictures and smirked. "What's that?" he said. "Evidence for your pity party." I looked at him and said the only line I gave them all day. "No, timeline." Then I left. That sentence didn't mean anything to them yet. It would. The first 3 days were almost quiet, which told me exactly how safe they felt. That's the thing about entitlement. It mistakes silence for weakness right up until the machine starts shaking. The first crack came Monday afternoon. One of Mercer Mechanical's biggest commercial clients escalated a contract renewal issue because the updated liability certificate had never been submitted with the service packet. Normally, I would have seen it, pushed the broker, attached the correction, and prevented the humiliation before my father even knew it existed. This time, the email sat untouched until the client copied him directly and wrote that they were reviewing alternatives if documentation wasn't corrected by end of day. He called me once, I let it ring. Tuesday morning, the dispatch system locked half the staff out because the billing card failed and the backup card was gone. That meant service history, equipment notes, next day routing, and customer scheduling started fraying at once. Tyler texted me at 8:07. Dad says stop being petty and log in. That was the first stage. Arrogance. They still thought this was emotional. A tantrum, a bluff. I didn't answer. 2 hours later, he texted again. Need the password for the vendor cert portal. Call me. Annoyance. Still no answer. Wednesday at 7:13 a.m., my father left the first voicemail that sounded different. Nolan, I think there's some confusion with a couple of accounts. Call me when you can. Confusion. The wording almost made me laugh. Confusion. As if thousands of dollars in hidden support had just wandered off by accident in the night. By Wednesday afternoon, Rochelle texted asking whether I had messed with the utility setup for the shop because apparently they had received a shut-off warning and Dad was trying to sort out a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. That was the second stage. Language shrinking under pressure. Thursday is when it started getting satisfying. A service van got flagged because the insurance auto draft had bounced. Payroll was suddenly short because a receivable Dad had counted on hadn't cleared, and the quiet reserve I used to bridge those gaps no longer existed. A supplier paused same-day materials release pending balance review. Tyler's truck payment hit, and the same brother who had thrown ramen at my car went quiet for the first time in months. That evening, he sent the text that told me the collapse had crossed from inconvenience into fear. What exactly were you paying for? I didn't send him the whole file, just one cropped screenshot from the ledger. Utility payments, software renewals, fuel transfers, one payroll bridge, one insurance reinstatement. Underneath it I wrote, enough. He didn't answer for 46 minutes. Then, is this real? I put the phone down and went back to dinner. Friday morning, my father called 4 times in 19 minutes. The first voicemail was still trying to sound controlled. Nolan, call me back. I need to clarify some things. The second had less shape. We have a problem here, just call me. The third dropped the authority altogether. If this is about the party, fine, we'll discuss it, call me. And the fourth finally said the word men like him save until the last possible second. Please. That was the third stage, urgency stripped of pride. By Friday afternoon, grandmother Irene tried her route. She left a voicemail about bitterness, family division, men under pressure, and how counting generosity poisons the spirit. She made sure to sound mournful instead of manipulative, which was her favorite trick. I called her back because some conversations deserve witnesses, even if the witness is only your own memory afterward. She said, if you were truly generous, you wouldn't be counting. I said, you're right, generosity doesn't count, accounting does. Silence. Then she said, don't be disrespectful. I answered, was the cake respectful? Nothing. Then I asked her whether the sign was respectful. Whether Tyler throwing ramen was respectful. Whether a father hosting applause for his son's humiliation was the kind of family unity she wanted me to restore. For once, she had no scripture ready. Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after the party, my father texted me with no punctuation at all. Talk now please, no period. No command, no performance, just panic trying not to look like panic. I replied with one line, Monday, noon, public place. He answered instantly, home. No, I wrote back. You wanted an audience when I left. You can have one when you ask why. He did not reply after that, which meant he was coming. We met Monday at a diner off Interstate 70, one of those places with laminated menus, tired booths, and coffee that tastes like old grudges. My father was already there, parked crooked outside like he'd arrived too fast. Tyler was beside him, and he looked different, less smug, more hollow. My father still had the posture, though, chin high. Jaw set, the body language of a man trying to wear control after it no longer fits. I brought 2 packets, 36 pages, cover sheet, timeline, financial summary, screenshots, payment references, account interventions, family transfers, emergency support, a conservative estimate of unpaid administrative labor. At the end, 1 full-page color print of the party sign hanging over the porch while everybody laughed beneath it. When I slid the packet across the table, my father looked at it with open contempt. What is this? The difference, I said, between your story and mine. He opened it like he expected nonsense. That confidence lasted maybe 10 seconds. His eyes hit the total on page 1 and snapped back to me so fast it almost looked like he'd been insulted physically. Tyler leaned over to read and whispered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath before he could stop himself. I stayed quiet. That was the power in the room, not volume, not emotion, just paper and time. My father started flipping pages too fast, which guilty people always do when they want to outrun the meaning. He jabbed at the software charges first. "This was for the office." "Yes," I said, "your office. These fuel payments were temporary. 3 months, references are on the next page." He flipped. There they were. "These payroll transfers aren't accurate. They're direct, bank confirmations are tabbed." He flipped again, tabbed. Tyler kept reading. His whole face changed as the pattern emerged. Not a random favor here or there, not a son exaggerating, a structure, a system. Years of hidden support laid out so cleanly there was nowhere for denial to hide. My father tried the safest moral shield he had. "Families help each other." I nodded once. "Interesting. When I lived in your house, it was proof I was a burden. When you lived off my labor and money, it was family." His jaw tightened. "That is not the same. It is to the utility company." He leaned in and lowered his voice. "Don't do this here." I looked around the diner, waitress refilling coffees, truckers at the counter, nobody interested in our drama. Perfect. "You mean with witnesses?" I asked. "You taught me to value those." Tyler tried to interrupt, desperate to make it smaller. "Okay, maybe you helped more than we realized." I turned to him. "You asked me for money 7 times in 14 months. He froze. "Truck insurance, rent gaps, gas, 1 phone bill, 2 emergency transfers, and you still laughed in the yard." He looked at the table after that. My father rushed to reclaim the ground. Fine, let's say you contributed. You were still a grown man living under my roof." There it was, his whole worldview, shelter as eraser, provision as permission, the roof over my head canceling every debt beneath it. I answered calmly. "If I had rented a 1-bedroom 4 years ago and kept my labor and money out of your business, Mercer Mechanical would have started collapsing a long time before the party. If I had billed you like a client for what I fixed, you couldn't have afforded me. The only reason you got to call me a parasite is because I kept protecting you quietly." That landed harder than the total. He didn't like numbers, but he understood exposure. Then he found the photo at the end of the packet. The sign. The balloons, the cake, his apron, Tyler laughing, Brent filming, the whole yard arranged around my humiliation like a celebration of moral victory. His expression changed immediately, not remorse, risk assessment. "You took this for leverage." "No," I said. "I took it because I knew you'd lie about how bad it was." That stung. He pushed the packet back half an inch like it had become hot. "So what now?" he asked. Not "are you okay?" Not "we were wrong," not "I'm sorry." What now? Operations. Almost laughed. "Nothing now," I said. "I'm not coming back." Tyler looked up. "You're really going to let everything crash over a family fight?" I met his eyes. This wasn't a fight. It was a business model with blood relatives. He had no answer. My father tried anger next because shame wasn't working. "You're enjoying this." "No," I said. "I would have enjoyed being respected before it cost you something." Then he played the oldest card in the deck, my mother. "You know your mother would hate this." That line used to cut deep because after she died, they all started using her memory like a pressure tool. But by then I could finally hear the manipulation without the costume. "My mother," I said, "would hate that her son got a sheet cake for being publicly degraded by people he was financially supporting." He actually looked away, only for a second, but I saw it. Then he asked the real question, the one underneath every moral argument, every appeal, every performance of fatherhood. "How much of this can be fixed?" There it was, no apology, no remorse, just restoration. I answered honestly. "Some accounts can probably be stabilized with money, some won't. 1 client is already gone, 2 more are probably shopping. Insurance will cost more now. Supplier trust doesn't come back because you yell louder. And you're going to find out very quickly how much email stuff was worth when nobody is translating your chaos into professionalism anymore." That line hit him harder than the number. He went quiet. Tyler didn't. He asked, voice small now, "Did you really do all this?" I looked at him for a long second. "You all really thought I didn't?" That was the sentence that settled over the table. Because that was the real humiliation, not mine, theirs. My father made one last move, and it was the move men like him always make when facts fail, threat disguised as dignity. "If you walk away now, don't expect to come back when you realize how hard the real world is." I reached into my bag, pulled out a second envelope, and set it on the table. Inside were contact details for a bookkeeping firm, a tax resolution service, a payroll company, a commercial insurance broker, and 3 independent operations consultants in Ohio. He frowned. "What's this?" "The limit of my generosity." I stood up. He stared at the envelope, then at me, and finally said the most revealing thing of the entire meeting. "After everything I've done for you." I picked up my keys. "The only reason your life looks stable," I said, "is because I was standing behind it where nobody clapped." Then I left him there with the packet, the envelope, the coffee he hadn't touched, and the first accurate accounting of his own life he had probably ever seen. I thought that meeting would be the end. It was. When you stop being the hidden support beam in a toxic family, collapse doesn't arrive like thunder. It arrives in installments. A week later, one of his larger contract clients reduced scope. Then a supplier moved Mercer Mechanical to cash-only terms. Then a service van sat unused because insurance costs had jumped and no one had the liquidity to resolve it cleanly. Then Tyler got screamed at by 2 technicians in the same week because dispatch was a mess and route histories were incomplete. Then grandmother Irene started calling around asking relatives for temporary help, which told me the household had finally crossed the line between strain and exposure. Rochelle stopped dropping by as often. Funny how fast extended family disappears when the entertainment gets expensive. Then Tyler came to Indianapolis. No jokes, no swagger, no little brother smirk, just exhaustion. He sat at my kitchen table and said, "Dad's turning on everybody now." I believed him instantly. That's how systems like ours survive. They feed one person to the tension, remove that person, and the poison spreads through the whole house. He told me Dad had started blaming him for scheduling breakdowns, blaming Rochelle for gossip, blaming vendors for becoming disloyal, blaming clients for overreacting, blaming everybody except the 4 years of invisible support that had made his chaos look manageable. Then Tyler said the only sentence that mattered. "I knew you were helping." I just didn't know it was this much. I asked him, if the company hadn't started failing, would you have admitted that? He looked at the table for a long time. No. That was the first fully honest thing I had heard from anyone in my family in years. I let him stay one night. We ate takeout, said very little. In the morning, he left. I didn't offer more. That mattered. My help was no longer automatic. My availability was no longer the family's emergency generator. 2 months later, my father emailed me a document titled Temporary Operations Proposal. Even after everything, he still couldn't help himself. It offered me a 90-day consulting arrangement to stabilize key systems while cash flow recovered. Compensation would be structured later. At the bottom, he wrote that it could also be a chance to rebuild trust. Rebuild trust. As if I were the damaged structure. I replied with 4 sentences. I am not returning. I am not providing unpaid or deferred labor. Do not contact me about business operations again. If you contact me personally, it needs to be respectful. He responded 7 minutes later, so you'll watch your father lose everything. I stared at that line for a while because that was the deepest hook in me. Children raised in houses like mine are trained to think that when a parent sinks, their job is to become flotation. That duty sits in your bones long after respect is gone. Then I wrote back. You are not losing everything because I left. You are losing everything because you built a life that only worked while someone you looked down on kept carrying it. He never replied. By early fall, the house on Juniper Street went on the market, not because he wanted to downsize, because he had to. Tyler sent me a blurry photo of the sign in the yard. Grandmother Irene moved in with her sister. Rochelle found somewhere else to orbit. Mercer Mechanical limped on smaller, meaner, and far less impressive than the version my father used to perform. Fewer trucks, worse terms, lower status work, the kind of survival that feels less like winning and more like publicly refusing to admit you lost. I did not go back. That was the real revenge, not the packet, not the diner, not hearing his voice break on voicemail. Those were moments. The actual victory was distance. Keeping my hands to myself while the consequences finally had the room to do what my protection had delayed for years. The contract in Indianapolis turned into 2 more, then referrals, then enough stability to form an LLC and charge what my time was actually worth. I rented a better place, bought a used Accord in cash, learned what dinner felt like when there wasn't always a crisis being manufactured in the next room, learned that peace can feel suspicious at first if you were raised in noise. Learned that calm isn't emptiness, it's safety. About 5 months after the house sold, my father called me from an unknown number. He said right away that he wasn't calling about money, which told me he knew exactly what shape his voice had taken in my life. Then he said he had found one of my mother's old recipe cards while packing and thought I might want it. That was the first thing he had offered me in years that didn't come wrapped around a need. "You can mail it," I said. There was a long pause. Then he asked quietly, "Did you really think I was that cruel?" I could have answered him 100 ways. I could have listed the sign, the cake, the ramen, the applause, the years of contempt, the way he had smiled while everybody laughed. I could have explained that cruelty is not a moment. It is a structure, a permission system, a pattern. Instead, I said, "You hung it over the porch, Dad." He exhaled. That was all. The recipe card arrived 3 days later. Chicken and dumplings in my mother's handwriting. At the bottom, she had written, "Add more pepper if Gary complains." I laughed so suddenly I almost cried. Then I framed it. People still ask if I regret not helping one last time. That question always sounds kind, but it hides the same trap my family built an entire system around. It assumes the most moral person in the story is the one who sacrifices again. The one who understands more, endures more, pays more, stays available longer. Lets cruelty borrow one more favor. I don't believe that anymore. If someone calls you family only when they need your labor, your money, your silence, or your ability to keep their collapse private, they are not protecting a relationship. They are protecting a system. If a parent needs you smaller so he can keep feeling bigger, that is not love. It is dependency with authority issues. And if a whole yard full of people can laugh while you are publicly degraded, then panic the second your support disappears. The panic is the confession. I was never the parasite. I was the backup card, the hidden payroll, the corrected email, the avoided penalty, the quiet transfer. The reason the lights stayed on long enough for him to act like he was the one holding the house together. My father's biggest mistake was not throwing the party. It was believing the man he humiliated would still keep the machinery running after finally seeing the truth in daylight. I still have the photo, the sign over the porch, the balloons at the mailbox, the cake on the folding table, my father in that ridiculous apron, Tyler mid-laugh. The whole family arranged around my humiliation like it was a community achievement. They thought they were documenting the day they got rid of the burden. What they actually captured was the last minute before the person carrying them decided to put the weight down. So no, I don't regret leaving. I regret how long I stayed useful enough to be mistaken for weak. My father threw a party when he thought he was removing a parasite. What he was really doing was celebrating the moment his life lost the only person still protecting it from consequences.